Hey, what's going on, roleplayers? It's the Bard here, and welcome back to the corner. In a previous video I made about the Hexblade, I made a few off-the-cuff remarks about the fact that the class seemed very Neverwinter inspired, but I also made the point that the otherworldly patron could be of just as much value to a caster as it is to a melee character, and I think I'd like to explore both of those as potential options for a character. So I was looking for abilities and spells to make a kind of Damnation Warlock because I really wanted to use the Hexblade and make use of the Accursed Specter. However, on its own it's just a challenge level 1 creature and it isn't very powerful. I think I would have liked to have done this entire build with just the Warlock class, but what I tend to look at the classes as is just parts and tools to build the character that you really want. A few levels of Lawbard can get you some really interesting abilities, and once you get up to level 6 you'll have access to magical secrets and you'll be able to pick up the absolute rarest spells available in the game. So what the character is going to focus on is a lot of radiating damage in auras and nova effects, and also a lot of life leeching. And this is kind of what's going on in the Damnation tree if you ever played Neverwinter, and it's something I wanted to replicate here and just see if we could get something that was close to or very similar to that style of gameplay. So with the parts we're using, we should be able to get something that's not only fairly good at kicking out some damage, but is also very survivable as well. Your Eldritch Invocations are going to include Grasp of Hadar, Cloak of Flies, Maddening Hex, and Gift of the Ever-Living Ones. We don't have room for Agonizing Blast yet, but if you really want it you can grab it at level 9. Unlike most warlocks who usually try to repel their targets, you're actually going to want to pull them in for this particular kind of build. Grasp of Hadar is going to be your primary tool for doing this, so Eldritch Blast is going to be your main cantrip for that. The trick is to pull creatures into your Cloak of Flies, because this is going to be dealing extra damage on top of what you're already doing with your cantrip. And at least one of your targets should be the focus of your Hexblade's Curse, because as you pull targets towards you, they naturally start to clump together. Use your Maddening Hex whenever you don't have to use your bonus action for anything else. So if you have a high charisma, say 20 for example, that's 5 damage coming from Cloak of Flies and 5 damage coming from Maddening Hex. So everything around you takes 10 damage immediately. This is before you calculate any of your cantrips or spells, and before you calculate in anything that might be running due to concentration. Gift of the Ever-Living Ones gives Chain Pact Warlocks a much more practical effect these days. If you decide to take rare spells like Aura of Vitality by using your magical secrets, then you're going to be a very useful healer for the rest of your party. However, every time you use a bonus action to heal yourself, you can guarantee yourself 12 hit points every time. Spells like Aura of Vitality and Cure Wounds, when combined with Gift of the Ever-Living Ones, gives you much more efficient healing when it comes to yourself. If you have a cleric in the group, that allows them to free up their actions to do other things, and it also frees up your spell slots so you don't have to concentrate on healing so much either, allowing you to use your spell slots for more practical, efficient or interesting spells per day. So the Spectre that you summon is only mediocre at best, but it does have some useful abilities, like being able to resist physical damage and having immunity to necrotic and poison effects. These traits are going to come in quite handy, especially when you start combining them with your Warlock and Bard special abilities, like your Invocations or your Bardic Inspiration. If your Spectre is the target of enemy aggression, then its resistances can help to keep its HP at reasonable levels. If it is starting to take a lot of damage, however, then Cutting Words can help to mitigate damage even further. If you're using your Spectre to go on the offensive, then you can use the basic Bardic Inspiration to improve the creature's attack roll, allowing it to use that 3d6 damage to full effect. Whilst it might not seem like an enormous amount of damage, there's always the chance that the life drain ability that the Spectre has can come into effect. By reducing the creature's maximum amount of HP, any healing that it has or any ability that it has that allows it to regain hit points is going to be less efficient. Considering the immunities and the resistances that your Spectre has, it can actually make a pretty respectable damage sponge. The base amount of hit points that the Spectre has, however, isn't exactly that high. But if you're a high enough level Warlock, you could cast Negative Energy Flood. You'll then roll 5d12, and whatever number you get, half that, and the target gains that as temporary hit points. Combine these temporary hit points with a wall of resistance and Cutting Words to reduce damage, and you've got yourself a pretty solid defender. A Spectre is also incorporeal, so it allows it to pass through certain objects. Now this can be pretty useful if you want to send it on some kind of suicide mission. If you can see a creature but can't get to it, your Spectre can go. However, if you really wanted to, you could curse your own Spectre with your Hexblade's Curse. By cursing your Spectre in this way, you can use your Maddening Hex to create a nova of psychic damage to the targets around it, just as long as you can see them, so something as small as a keyhole would be perfectly fine. And then, eventually when it does die, you're only going to regain hit points from it anyway. It's pretty much win-win. If you're a really high level Warlock, instead of gaining those hit points, you could pass the curse on to another target. If you have a problem with environmental hazards, you can actually use your Hex to curse your Spectre, kill it off with the Maddening Hex, and regain some hit points. Because there aren't any other creatures around to heal from, at least you could heal from that if you were absolutely desperate. So this particular build is really based on radiating damage, so make sure you're not too close to your other party members. Eldritch Blast is going to be the spell you'll use to reel creatures in, but when they are in combat with you, Thunderclap is the primary spell that you're going to be using over and over again because it radiates damage outwards. If you need a good single target damage cantrip because creatures are in close combat with you, then maybe consider picking up something like Toll the Dead or Infestation or possibly Poison Spray. Since a lot of your damage dealing effects don't rely on you taking an action, things like Cloak of Flies, Maddening Hex, possibly Spirit Guardians if you've got it, you can use your action then for Blade Ward if you need to go on the defensive. Armour of Agathis and Hex is still the gold standard for when it comes to low level Warlock spells, but for a change we're going to get to use Arms of Hadar, which is a spell that I don't see very often. Arms of Hadar does necrotic damage, which is absolutely perfect because it does it in a radius, and because it's necrotic damage, it doesn't affect your Accursed Specter. So your Spectre can be next to you in your Cloud of Flies, it doesn't matter because it's immune to poison, it can be next to you when you cast Arms of Hadar, or if you use Spirit Guardians because it's immune to necrotic, and the targets of your Maddening Hex are your choice, so you don't have to put your Spectre in harm's way with that. Second level has some of the best utilities in the game, whether you're casting them as a Bard or as a Warlock. So things like Whole Person, Levitate, Invisibility, Knock, these are great utilities. Grab them because you don't want to be a one-trick pony. Third level now, and this is where spells start to get really interesting. Since you're going to be up close all the time, you're going to want a decent melee attack. Vampiric Touch is great for melee, but it also is your primary life leech as well. Gift of the Ever-Living One states that you treat any dice roll to determine the hit points you regain as having rolled their maximum value for you, but it never states from where. The damage you deal with Vampiric Touch determines exactly how many hit points you gain, because you gain half of the damage you deal, so even if you deal really bad damage, you are assumed to have rolled the maximum amount of damage for the purpose of regaining hit points. So whatever damage you deal, just calculate the maximum damage, half it, and that is the hit points you will always gain using this spell. Gaseous Form is another spell that I really like because it's a good combination of mobility, defense, and utility. Not only that, Gaseous Form allows you to occupy a creature's space, allowing you to get deep within the enemy lines. Now you can't cast spells while in Gaseous Form, but you can use your special abilities, so your Maddening Hex, your Cloak of Flies, Hexblade's Curse. These are all things you should be able to use. They can either be running at the time, or you can use them whilst in the Gaseous Form. Gaseous Form combined with Cloak of Flies turns your character into a floating cloud of death. Spirit Guardians is a great spell for doing radiating damage, and because you can designate any creatures you want to not be affected by it, your party only has to be 5 feet away from you so that they're not in your Cloud of Flies. You can pick up Spirit Guardians by using your magical secrets as a Lore Bard. Spirit Guardians is particularly effective because not only does it deal damage, but it also reduces their speed. By halving their speed, it makes it much easier for you to use spells like your Grasp of Hadar to keep reeling them in towards you. If they do start to move away, they're probably only going to get maybe 10 or 15 feet away from you. So you can keep pulling them back in with your Grasp of Hadar. So this is going to be one of your main spells that you're going to want to cast a lot of the time. You should be using your magical secrets to gain the absolute rarest spells available, so something like Aura of Vitality is a brilliant choice, especially when you combine it with your Gift of the Ever-Living Ones, because if you're going to use it on yourself, again, you get the maximum amount of hit points every time. If you're not bothered about being a party healer, or you've got a decent cleric who's doing that job, then maybe pick up something like Crusader's Mantle to increase the damage that your Spectre and the rest of your party is doing with their melee attacks. Since the spells you get from your magical secrets are freebies, you should also consider picking up Bestow Curse. Not only is it a very creative spell that has lots of different applications and allows you to make your own abilities, but you can also use it as a trigger for your Maddening Hex as well. As per usual, there's nothing decent in 4th level, so pick up some utilities like Hallucinatory Terrain or Dimension Door. If you get up to the higher levels, then Innovation is basically a mid-range version of Vampiric Touch, so it's good for regaining hit points from a single target. And Negative Energy Flood we've gone over already. But negative energy flood also has a useful byproduct. A target killed by negative energy flood rises as a zombie, so you can start to use your Hexblade's Curse on your zombie if you so desire. Because what happens with Hexblade's Curse is once you kill something, it stops being of any value unless you're a really high level warlock. By using your Hexblade's Curse or a Hex spell in this way, you can create what is essentially a walking zombie bomb. As the zombie wanders around pursuing enemies, you can use the psychic resonance from your Maddening Hex to continually deal damage. Now if creatures decide that the zombie is a threat and start attacking it, you can give it a quick blast of negative energy flood to give it some much needed temporary hit points. If they do decide that you are the more dangerous threat, then your zombie is continually going to stand there radiating this damage. Now the zombie is going to take psychic damage from your Maddening Hex, however it's only going to be 5 damage, and the zombie has Undead Fortitude, so it makes a Constitution save when it's about to die, 5 plus the damage dealt. Now a zombie has a +3 Constitution modifier, so all you need to roll is 7 or higher every time you use your bonus action to radiate damage. It's worth dealing 5 damage to that in order to deal 5 damage to everything else. Even if your zombie dies anyway, it doesn't matter because you're going to get the hit points, so you really haven't lost anything there. So that was my Damnation Warlock using the Hexblade from Xanathar's Guide to Everything. Lots of radiating damage, plenty of survivability, and just tons of crazy ideas thrown into the mix as well. If you like this sort of thing, be sure to leave a like. If you've got something you'd like to say on the subject, that's what the comments section is for. And if you're not subscribed, I'd really appreciate you clicking that subscribe button so that you can see more things that come from the channel. Anyway, with that being said, I will see you guys next time at the gaming table.